On this edition of Monster Lab, we're going to teach you how to make this. Sound good? Hit subscribe and come along. Here we go. So we decided to film this today because I am doing a cute little gremlin. And I don't normally do cute. I'm not very good at it. The other thing is, it's a two-piece mold, which is very helpful if you're doing something that's completely 3D and it's got big ears or something. You need to know that. The third reason is, it's for a thing called Monster Day. We're gonna start in downtown Greeley, and it's a day to celebrate monsters. We're kind of hoping that'll catch on. So here we go. This is our character. Isn't he sweet? And so I'm going to cut this clay and put it on here, but I like to put a little bit of water first. It just creates a better vacuum. And then you just lay it on. Now kids, don't try this at home. No, wait, that's what this is all about. Anyway, so I'm just getting bulk shapes, and we're gonna show the whole process, but since this is gonna take quite a few hours, we're gonna speed it up so you get the feel of it without sitting there and falling asleep. So I'll get on it and we'll see you soon. Okay, this is our beautiful little Gremlin by John Lorenzi, and we've got a color version we're going to use for the paint job and try to match that. Beautiful piece. So I have painted him with Krylon spray paint, and it's really good to let it dry overnight. If you are in a hurry, you could put it on, leave it a few hours with a fan on, and you'll be all right. You just don't want that paint coming off the plaster. Trust me on that. So the paint is dry, and here's our little guy. This is going to be a two-piece mold. It's a little more complicated, and there's some things that I've got to cover, but they're not really hard. Now, you can get really complicated and get into silicone keys and all sorts of things. That's all good, but I think it's better to get you started without spending a bunch of money and trying to figure stuff out. So here's what you'll need. You'll need number 1 pottery plaster by USG. Now, there are other things you can use. I just recommend that. Some water that's tepid, that's it's cool to the touch basically, but it's not cold and it's certainly not hot. Just it'll feel a little cool to your fingers. A scraper like this is very nice. 1 or 2 inch brushes, a knife. Doesn't have to be sharp. Probably shouldn't be sharp. Then these little finger tools, and they've got a line here. That's very helpful. This clay cutting tool. Now, for something this size and something that's got a lot of turns, I'm going to get this thickness down to probably a little less than a 1/2 inch. Also, it's always good to have a rag, wet clay, gloves, not necessary, just makes cleaning your hands a little easier when you're mixing plaster. Spray bottle, and some water for the sponge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut strips of clay, and I'm going to bend them and lay them on. Now, what's important is to try to keep that clay at a 90-degree angle to the sculpture. If you start doing this too much, now a little of this is okay. You start doing it too much, you can end up with the mold locking and things. So I'm going to start cutting strips of clay and laying them on. Now, what you'll need to consider when you have a two-piece mold to make is you've got to kind of figure out your best trek. And I'm going to come up midway, going to come up here. It gets a little dicey on the ears. Now, a lot of times I'll come right in front of the ear or right behind the ear. A lot of times people will come right up the middle of the ear. I've got this ear thick enough, it's kind of pyramid shape, which if you can do that, it'll save you a lot of misery. But I'm going to come up a little bit into the ear, cut across here, and keep it pretty much in a 90-degree angle to divide this in half. So now, the reason that you're going to go to all this extra trouble to do a two-piece mold is because it would be very, very difficult to get around right angles. Imagine you've got a hole on the bottom of it like that, and you've made a one-piece mold. You've got to go up and over blind into an ear and try to get a little tool to get the clay out. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a lot of it out, and then it'll come out, especially if it's pyramid shaped and it's painted, but it's almost impossible to go around these corners. So you're forced, really, and when you're making something like this with a lot of extensions and points and things, to come and divide it into two. And once it's in two, now when this arm's divided, it's a straight shot. I can see straight down to the fingers and make sure I've got it clean. I can, if it's mold ends here, I can see in an angle, I can make sure all the clay comes out of the ears. And so you can get away with a lot with rubber in a mold, weaving around and stuff. But when you're trying to get something fairly hard out of another hard medium, you've really got to have good access to get your tools in to get it cleaned out. I'm going to now start cutting the wet clay, Walter E. Disney clay. This device is another thing that's not absolutely necessary. You could do this with a wire tool or even just a knife. It's just this makes it easy to keep a very regular thickness, and it just makes life easy. I wouldn't live without it now that I've been so spoiled. So you cut the layer. Now it doesn't need to be this thick. You don't want it that wide. So then I come along and cut it in half. Okay, so I'm going to come up. Now this just makes it, if you don't have to squish the clay around, it's nice. So I'm going to cut a little wedge out so I can at least start close to where I want to be. And as you are coming up, you can squeeze the clay a little and get it to help conform to the shape. I'll spin this around in just a second to show you what I'm doing here. You'll need to make sure that you get a perfect seal. There's no air gaps and things for the plaster to go through, because that will make life miserable if you don't get it sealed up perfectly to the clay. So here's what this is looking like. Now, I'm going to come in with tools and things to get that very smooth and make sure there's no air gaps. But what I like to do also, this is more than like to, you need to do this, because this is another thing that's pretty stressful, is you're putting on the plaster, everything's going great, and your dam goes and falls because it's not well braced. So I take little balls of wet clay and I push them into the sculpture. Don't blend them in the sculpture, because you want these things to come out, but then I blend them into the clay, and that connects it very well to the dam, but it also just gets enough of a tack to the sculpture, but it'll be easy to peel off. And I also I'm trying to keep a space. I don't want to back right up to a detail, because then the mold will be very thin. Like, imagine the inner part of the ear. If this clay doesn't have some thickness and you get the dam that close, then your plaster is going to be real thin, and that's not good either. So think quite a bit about what you're doing and clay placement and things, because it will save you a lot of misery. And trust me, I've learned almost all my lessons the hard way, and I don't like it, but that's just the way it is. Abraham Lincoln said he was slow to learn, but when he finally got it, it was etched in stone, because, you know, when you suffer and make mistakes that cause you a lot of work and stuff, boy, you really learn good. But, you know, if you can learn it without that, it's just so much nicer. I'm not polishing anything yet. I'm just getting it on, making sure I've got a good positioning for my dam. I'm going to continue putting on the balls of clay to make sure it doesn't fall off. Because if this falls off while I'm getting film, you might hear a bad word, and we don't want that, because I don't like to swear, but I do know all the words. Besides, I don't like to cuss. It sounds like hell. All right. I'm even putting a little clay here in the ears just to make sure, but we want to make sure that dam doesn't fall off. All right, now I'll stop that, sorry. So now I'm taking my fingers and wetting them, and I'm going in. I've taken the tool, little finger tool, and I've smoothed it in right in the edge, trying to keep that 90-degree angle. And now I'm taking a little bit of water and just trying to get this more level and smooth. Don't use tons of water, because then you start making a muddy mess. This is just enough so that it slicks it down and you can move across the clay smoothly. So now we have a reasonably flat surface, but you don't want the molds to do this. So therefore you need keys. And keys, now there's some fancy ways to do them. We're not going to do them the fancy ways. The most important thing to remember about a key is you want it to be smooth and not have any hooks. So, make your indentation and push the clay around. See how I'm blending at an angle? I blend away this edge so that at no point will it lock, because at some point you're going to need to be able to just pull the mold apart like that. A little bit of waviness, sometimes if you're following certain lines and things, that's okay. It's almost keys in and of themselves to have the clay conform to certain body shapes and things, but these keys will make sure that it will lock into the position you put it in, and this is just a real easy way to do it. I've just smoothed this out a little bit with water, and we're done. Now, these keys, again, you see how they're round, but they never hook. The plaster, if let's say you had a shape like that, but you accidentally had a hook like that, then you try to pull the plaster, it's not going to work. So make sure they're graceful and it's fairly flat, but those keys will help you line up the two molds when you get ready. So now we're going to make that mold. All right, so the dam is in. Now, one thing that I think is very helpful is to go ahead and just stick a piece of plastic into your dam, the back of your dam, just so that you don't have to worry about plaster splashing on the back of your monster. So that's what that is, and we're going to get started. Now, like explained before, you take the plaster, you get the amount of water that you think would be enough to cover your character, and then you start adding plaster and let it sift through your fingers. And what you're looking for is islands forming on the surface of the water. You have to wait a little bit and try not to dump it in too fast, because it's got to soak into every bit of this plaster. Okay, so for the most part, I have islands that have formed over pretty much the surface of the water, and there's no need to be in a super rush right now, because it's good to let it soak in a little bit. And so then you just get in there with your hand and start breaking up clumps. I'm spinning and doing this as I go. You've got a good amount of working time, but you don't want to dilly-dally either. Don't get in too big a rush in this process. You want to get rid of all those lumps, but plaster, it's got this kind of period where you've got some good working time, and then it starts to set, and you want to be able to be ready to rock and roll when it decides it's wanting to set. So you just take the plaster, and I like to brush it on two directions, and that helps get it in all the all the cracks. And you really got to work areas like the mouth, and I got all sorts of fine detail, nostril holes and space around the teeth and skin texture. You got to hit all of that. Now, when you're not doing mixing by the book, which you need a scale and you have to weigh it and stuff, which I recommend, if you do it by the book, it would normally be a little runnier than this, and it gives you a little more time, which is nice, but on a character this size, we should be all right. But you do want to get into all those details. Did I mention this can be messy? Can be messy. So whenever you do this, you might find a place that's not too, maybe if it's fancy, put plastic down and stuff like that. And but yeah, it's a little bit messy. Now it's starting to get thick, so I can really build up certain areas. And this is where you want to be a little more deliberate. No need to panic yet. You just want to keep at it. No cell phone calls right now. They'll just have to wait. Okay, so we've got this covered, and now this is a step you don't have to do, and it requires an unusual material, which I kind of hate to do, but it's hemp, and hemp will give your mold strength. And so if it gets dropped a little hard, or even if it cracks, it will help hold that mold together. And so we like to use hemp wherever we can. I'm just going to put a thin layer on here, and really, while I'm doing the hemp, this is setting up hard, so I'll be able to go very quickly to taking the clay off and starting the second side. So we're going to do that real quick. Okay, so I have some hemp, and I'm going to dip it into the plaster. Now this plaster I mixed much thicker, so we won't have quite as much of a weight, but it's not important really, because I don't have to worry about a lot of details and things. I can go right to laying this up. So just make sure it's in there soaked up well, and just lay it on. This hemp is wonderful stuff. It's super strong. You buy it by the bale, and you know, you can find it sometimes at the bigger sculpture supply houses and things, but I'm sure you can find it online. And just a great tool in the arsenal for trying to do a pro job. So I'm a big believer that if you have the information and the tools and quality materials, that you can do a pro job. So now we're going to start the back half. I'll remove the plastic. And really all you need for this is like a little finger tool, and then I like to use a loop tool that's soft, so you know, if you hit the sculpture, it's not going to ding it up too bad. But the first thing is to get these balls off, and each one you pull off, you know, you can try to, because there's a vacuum, of course, created by all of this. You want to try to release that. Okay, so something I'd like to do, now this is one of those unnecessary things, but I like to take some of the extra clay and put it right along this edge. And this just helps keep it from you know, getting into the other plaster and making it hard to pull apart. And so it's just one of those details that you can do or not do, but I would recommend it because it takes very little time and it just makes life a little bit easier. And you want to actually seal it. You just want to get it stuck on there as far as the plaster up on top and the sides, but right where it's hitting the inside, you want to smooth it out completely and make a seal there. Okay, this is extremely important. You need to put something on that plaster so the plaster doesn't stick. Again, there's lots of things, tincture, green soap, paint, shellac, all sorts of things. Most people have Vaseline, and you don't want to put it on super thick, but you do want to make sure that you hit just the plaster. You don't want to hit the sculpture. It's not terrible if you do, but really better if you don't. You could put this on with your fingers, and I'm actually going to use my fingers just to make sure that I've hit everything. There's mistakes you make that are unfortunate, and then there's the lethal ones. This is one of those lethal ones. If you don't get this mold release on, well, you're not going to be happy. We're going to let this thing dry, and then we're going to pull the mold halves apart and show you how to do that. Then we're going to clean the clay out, and then we're going to fill it with latex. See you real soon. Now the mold has cured, and I'm going to first start by clearing out this clay that's in the crack. Now, down the road, we'll talk about keys and things like that. That's all very nice. I just think it's better to not make it so convoluted and so many things to remember and stuff. And the clay actually kind of helps find that pry point. So you just get the clay off and stick your screwdriver in there. And don't, try to get it all in one whack. Hit some different spots. You're just trying to break that vacuum. Is there a monster in there? Basically, all you need for this part is a hammer, a screwdriver, the wire loop tool, and a finger tool. Now the painting is nice because the mold comes out very clean. I like that. So does Mondo. So basically, you want to just start peeling the clay out. The one tool I didn't mention is a loop tool, a bigger loop tool. Since he didn't come out completely easily, I've got to clear out some of the clay so that it's easier to peel. Like right now, I'm gonna peel out his head. And if you get it now, here's where you gotta be careful though. You gotta kind of be mindful of where the tool is in relationship to the mold, so you're not scraping away details. But once you get it thin enough, then you can kind of just fold the clay And with that paint in there, it just makes it a little bit nicer. There's also a little trick, like if you get some clay and you give it a quick yank, sometimes that'll help break the vacuum. You go in slow so you're not damaging it, but then you give it a quick yank and see how that broke that vacuum. One other thing, if you have access to air, compressed air, you can get that air line in there and blow out some of these. And so if you can just get a whole board kind of to the tip, that air can get in there and just pop it out. And we use that a lot, but you know, that doesn't mean anything if you don't have it. And of course you gotta be careful with compressed air, you know, to wear goggles and ear muffs and things so that you don't blast a piece of clay in your eye. But anyway, I will finish this up and then we're going to pour it. So the molds are all cleaned out and we're ready to pour them up. Take 1/2 and lay it down and make sure it can't fall off the table. And you'll need to kind of gently set it on place and use your keys to help guide him in. And then he locks in position. Take your strap. Now this is something you can get at a ceramic supply place or sculpting supply. And you can use other things, like you can use straps they use for trucks to hold stuff down. You can get it lumber yards and so forth, but these are a little easier to work with, and I like them. But just something to hold it firmly together, and it's not going to pop off. Now there's a little trick. You can take something. See what happened? Here's that illustrates my little trick. So sometimes they'll do that to you, especially if they're taunt, and especially if they're on a curved surface. So you get it in there and put a little stick in there, and then it's not going anywhere. Okay, you've got to get it level. Whatever you have to do to get it level so that you can fill it and leave it. All right, that looks pretty level. Then we pour the magic latex, one of my favorite products in the whole world, into the mold. And I usually just find one spot to pour. It kind of makes lines a little bit as it goes in and things, so it's better to just pour from one spot. If it's got some undercuts and stuff, you may need to roll the mold around a little bit. All right, so that's a little more level. Now, another thing I like to do is overfill it, so that when you come back and cut it, you can cut a really nice line. And it just makes life easy. Okay, so we're gonna let this set for probably an hour and a half to get a good thickness, and we'll be right back. So we've let our little monster sit overnight and dry completely. Now, if you're in a big hurry, you can do a fan like this, and you know, but depending on the small little areas, you could dry them in maybe a couple hours. Might take a little more, 4 to 6, if it's got a lot of skinny stuff on it. Now, there's a lot of things you can talc with, But since you made a mold with plaster, you'll have plaster sitting around. So I'm going to turn the fan on and put a little plaster in there. If you have an air hose, it's nice to blow the plaster out, but this will do just fine. All right. So I'm going to take the strap off. You can just kind of pull it away from the one side that you're pulling off. And, you know, in case the latex is a little fragile, you can just take it easy a little bit. Make sure you're not pulling against anything too hard. I'm right now trying to get these ears out in one piece. Distribute the talc a little bit, and there he is, your little monster. We're going to Dremel him up in the paint room and paint him and turn him into a real little fella in color. See you there. All right, so we're ready to trim. So here we go. And a safety note with scissors, never do this with your scissors. Ow! See that flange I left around here? That's going to make life easy. We're going to be able to trim real nice and clean. Oh no, I'm going to have to get a new butt. This one's cracked.
No, 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 no.
So you've got to trim this flange too. Now we're going to Dremel it, but you got to get it pretty short to be able to Dremel it. So we'll get this off of there too. Now, as I was trimming, I noticed that there's a little problem here, little mold error where there was an air pocket. So when I find out who made this mold, they're fired. That's it. We don't fool around here. Okay, so now we have a Dremel tool that we use around here. And, you know, it's a little bit mighty, but we do a lot of stuff and we do it fast. But there are plenty of smaller craft Dremel tools that probably make more sense if you're not doing a lot of big monsters. But, and this is a very good idea. You don't want to get stuff flinging at your eye at high speed. The other thing with Dremel tools is this one's air driven, but the other ones can be electric or even battery powered, just as long as they've got a little bit of beef to them and some kind of a sandy grinding stone to them. Okay, so he's got his hair cut and he's ready for going out on the town. So we're gonna get him painted and ready to roll. We're ready to paint. Now I'm going to be using a quartz sprayer and a Pache H3 gun. Now there's lots of tutorials on painting on Monster Lab, so you might check that out. And by the way, if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe and be sure and hit the like button, because if you don't, I'm sending this guy after you. He may not look scary, but man, can he bite your ankles. All right, here we go. Also, just so you'll know, we're going to use 3 base colors plus an airbrush base color. We're going to do green, and I'm going to highlight in yellow. Now that makes the green very vibrant. It doesn't really turn it yellow, it just kind of umps the, it's almost like neon. And then I'm going to be putting purple in the ears and the paws, and then white on the teeth. And when I rub it out, it all looks great. So here we go. Don't blink or you'll miss it. Okay, now we're going to put the ink rub out. Now see our other videos for the paint, the base was a latex house paint mixture, and then this is going to be an FW rub out, and all the rest of them are FW inks and 5-minute epoxy, and so here we go. This is 70% alcohol. Okay, so this is FW blue. Now the blue on green kind of gives it a little bit of like a different green color. In fact, I might do his nose in this. And I think I might do his... It just breaks it up, looks a little different. So this is DevCon 5-minute epoxy. It's a clear, glossy medium, and it works great and it doesn't yellow. We're gonna do a little in the nostril, because, you know, it's wet now. Okay, so we're done. And this little monster could be anything. He could be your girlfriend, your boyfriend. You could make a little dog, a little cat, a little alien from outer space, anything you want. Doesn't have to be cute, could be scary. Now you know how to make a two-piece mold and make a completely three-dimensional piece. And anyway, I guess that's it. Is that it? You want a name? Oh, somebody out there. A name, please. No, that's not good. How about Trouble? Trouble's pretty good. All right, we'll call him Trouble. All right, Trouble, is that a good name? Yeah, I like it. All right, he likes that. So anyway, we will see you next time on Monster Lab. Bye.